It's a super smoky morning here in the backyard of science. It smells like smoke. There's some fires are really cranking. Air quality's poor. I can even see ash falling in front of my face as I'm standing here filming this. This week's topic is about air quality, so we need to investigate what's in our air, what kind of particles are there, and where they come from, and maybe how we can clean them out. I've closed the windows on the house and turned on the air filtration system, so it's all going through the furnace filter now. Hopefully that'll clean it up, but let's think about air quality this week. You can see all the ash that's falling out of the sky from the fires right now and the poor air quality. It shows up really well on the grill cover. All that is ash. Those are big particles. Those aren't the particles that are most dangerous or common air pollutants, but they're big particles that are really observable. So that's one thing that's in our air right now. Here's a really good example of macro particulate stuff in the air. In this window right here, I'd opened it, left it open all night, and before I went to bed I cleaned off the windowsill, and you can see just overnight all the stuff that came out of the air in there. Let me wipe that clean. You'll see all those particles are macro particles that were in the air last night from the wildfires probably. So there's the part that I didn't wipe, and you can see all the stuff that's there versus what I did wipe. So there's a lot of stuff in the air even when it doesn't feel smoky.
Shed of Science.
Let's do a couple of different experiments to see what kind of macro and micro particles there are in the air. So the macro is the big stuff. We're going to use this little candle lantern to investigate that first. So have a look at that. That's just a candle burning inside it. It's a little candle lantern that has a top that's meant to hang on something then, but watch what happens when I blow out that candle. And you can see the smoke coming off that a little bit. Hopefully you can see that in the video. And that smoke, the reason we can see that is there are particles in there. There's stuff in the air. One way we can prove that to ourselves very carefully, we'll light the candle lantern again, and then we'll take this tissue, and we want to be careful when we're doing this not to catch this on fire, but if we just hold this tissue over the candle, we can see evidence that a lot of the material that's burning off that candle is going into the air. And so the tissue is just catching that material, and you can see what it looks like it's burnt is a lot of that material, let me see if I can get that in front of the camera, is literally just caught on the tissue. And so when we blow that out again, that smoke or whatever's coming off there is just going into the air as those large particles, just like the forest fire smoke that we can smell. And today's a particularly smoky day. The air quality is not great, and it really smells like smoke here. So that's one thing we can do to think about what causes some of the particulate matter to get in the air. Okay, let's do another activity, and this is one you can do with kids, and kids can do to investigate what kind of particles are in the air. We can make our own air particulate matter detectors. It's really kind of fun. If you just take a blank note card or some thick white paper and cut this into squares or smaller pieces, they don't have to be this big. We're just going to cut this into maybe some small squares like this. The size really doesn't matter. But it is good to keep the sizing consistent if you want to compare one to another, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we take a bunch and we cut them into little rectangles or something that are pretty much the same size. Then what we can do is we can apply a coating of a clear hand salve, something like Vaseline or Aquaphor. In this case I've got some other hand lotion here that's petroleum jelly based. And if I just take this and I put a really thin layer of that on each, very thin, this is going to help any particulate matter in the air just stick to the card if it falls out of the air. So remember that little video clip? I have a little video clip of some forest fire fallout material that was on my windowsill. If I set one of these little particulate matter detectors there, those particles would stick to it. they would stick to this thing. They'll land on the uncoded cards as well, but the particles will stick to the coded cards, and that way we can observe them later on. So these are our little air particle detectors. And what we would do is then set these out, maybe overnight, and then come back and use a magnifying glass and look at them and see what material has stuck to them. And we'll find all kinds of macro particles that we can see with our naked eye, and maybe some micro ones we can see with the hand lens as well. And you could do all sorts of cool experiments with this. You might ask kids what kind of indoor air particles they would expect that they might have. For example, if you're cooking something and it generates a lot of smoke, let's say you burn something, just like the candle, that's particulate matter going into the air. So you could set one of these detectors out in the kitchen for 24 hours, set one in the bedroom for 24 hours, then collect them and compare them and see if there were in fact more large particles on the kitchen one, for example. So you could do all kinds of cool experiments with these little simple particulate matter detectors. And if you make them the same size, then you could count the number of visible particles on each and compare them, and then have some kind of quantitative comparison. There are twice as many in the one that was outdoors than the one that was indoors, etc., etc. So I'm going to do this experiment. I'm going to take my little detectors and set them in various places. I'll set one outside, one on the windowsill, and then one somewhere else in my house where the windows are closed. And then I'll come back and see if in fact there are more large particles on the one that was outside. My hypothesis is there'll be the most on the one that's outside, um, the least on the one that's inside away from the windows, and maybe a in-between amount on the one that's in my windowsill. So that's something you could do as well. Let's go next and see where this fits into our elementary science curriculum. We'll go examine the standards and the grade level expectations for some things that might be related to air quality.
Okay, let's take a look at some of our Colorado academic standards for science that might apply to air pollution or particulate matter in the air. So I already went and selected science at each of the 5 elementary grade levels for Earth and Space Science, and you can add them so you can see them all on the same page. It's kind of a neat feature. So we have first grade, second grade, third, fourth, and fifth for Earth and Space Science. And as we scroll down through, we really don't see anything related to air pollution until we get to grade 4. First grade's about the sun, the moon, and the stars. Second grade starts about some events on Earth and wind and water changing the land. Third grade is starting to be about climate and weather hazards. But then in fourth grade, we see this standard statement 4: energy and fuels that humans use are derived from natural resources, and their use affects the environment in multiple ways. That might be um, one that's relevant, a grade level expectation that's relevant. So if we expand that and we can see that there's a statement in here about their use affects the environment in multiple ways. Some resources are renewable, others are not. So it may be getting something related there to air quality and air pollution. Then in fifth grade, we really start to see something related to air pollution if we look at grade level expectation number 5 here, where it says societal activities have had major effects on land, ocean, atmosphere, and even outer space. If we expand that, we see information right here about human impacts on Earth systems. Human activities in agriculture, industry, and everyday life have had major effects on the land, vegetation, streams, ocean, air, and even outer space. But individuals and communities are doing things to help protect the Earth's resources and environment. So there's definitely a place in science in grade 5 to talk about air quality. And so that's a place where you might want to think about doing some of these activities on investigating particulate matter in the air. And I think that'd be a good place to let kids ask their own questions, maybe build those particulate matter detectors and test some of those questions by looking around the house. Okay, so that is this week's Backyard Science on air quality. Hopefully, this will give you some ideas on some activities you could do yourself and with your students related to air quality.